What if the genius of the Beatles was never harmony at all, but a slow duel between two men who could not survive each other and could not work without each other? We are taught to mourn the breakup as a loss. But what if the breakup was simply the moment the duel became visible, when two authors can only become themselves by wounding the other? Is that a partnership, or a 10-year-long collision we mistook for friendship? Two boys sat in a small room in Liverpool, knees almost touching, two guitars facing each other like mirrors, and they wrote songs eyeball to eyeball. That was the method. Not two men in separate studios sending each other tapes, but two faces, close enough to read every flicker of doubt, every flicker of triumph. They wrote looking directly at one another, and from the start the act of writing was already a contest. One would offer a line. The other would better it, or break it, or steal it, and turn it into something the first could never have reached alone. This was not collaboration in the gentle sense. It was rivalry disguised as friendship, and the friendship was real precisely because the rivalry was real. They made a pact as teenagers, a single name on every song, Lennon and McCartney, whoever wrote what. It sounded like generosity. It was a cage. By the middle of their career, most of the songs were written alone, one of them dominant, the other barely present. Yet the shared name remained, a contract neither could escape. Every solo triumph was credited to the pair. Every private victory belonged, on paper, to the man you were trying to surpass. Imagine writing your finest song knowing the world would forever attach your rival's name to it. That is not a marriage. That is two prisoners chained at the wrist, each one's freedom impossible without dragging the other along. And for a time, the chain produced miracles, because the competition itself was the fuel. When Lennon wrote a song reaching back into the fog of his Liverpool childhood, a hazy, suspended thing about a place from his boyhood, McCartney answered within weeks with his own childhood street. Bright, precise, almost cinematic. Two portraits of the same lost city, written in direct response to each other, each one sharpened by the need to not be outdone. Neither song exists without the other man's pressure. The rivalry did not damage the work. The rivalry was the work. Then, in 1967, the man who held the two of them in orbit died. Their manager, the one figure both respected, the buffer between two enormous wills, was gone. And into that vacuum stepped the more organized, more driven of the two. McCartney began to lead, to direct, to push the band into projects, films, concepts, sessions that ran past dawn. To Lennon, increasingly drawn toward raw honesty and toward a new life outside the band. This leadership felt like control, and control from the one person he could never simply obey. The younger partner was now giving orders to the elder. The pupil had become the foreman. And resentment in a duopoly is never about one song. It is about who gets to decide what the thing they built together is allowed to become. Underneath the personal friction lay something deeper, a collision of two opposed theories of what art is for. For Lennon, by the end, a song should bleed. It should be confession, nerve exposed, the artist refusing to hide behind craft. For McCartney, a song should be built, balanced, finished, a made object of lasting beauty whose seams do not show. One worshipped the wound, the other worshipped the architecture. For a few years, these two faiths held each other in tension, and the result was the most complete body of work in the history of the form. But two religions cannot share one altar forever. The confessor began to find the architect cold, dishonest, evasive. The architect began to find the confessor lazy, cruel, self-indulgent. Each heard in the other's method an accusation against his own. By the time of the sprawling double album that many call the White Album, the band was no longer a band. It was four solo artists using each other as session musicians, often recording in separate rooms, sometimes refusing each other's presence entirely. The unified voice was gone. What remained was a collection of individual statements sharing a cover, and yet, listen closely, and the friction still produces brilliance, because even apart, even hostile, each man was still writing toward the other, still trying to win an argument that no longer had a name. Then the duel stopped being private. In 1970 and 71, it spilled into the press and onto vinyl. Lennon released a song that was, by any honest reading, a direct attack on his former partner, mocking his music as lightweight, accusing him of mediocrity dressed up as charm. McCARTNey answered more quietly, but he answered. The public watched two men who had once written facing each other now firing across a distance, each insisting he had always been the real one, each unable to stop talking about the other. Even the hatred was a form of attention. Even the insults proved they remained, to the end, each other's only true measure. And here is the autopsy. We want to believe the Beatles would have lasted if only the two of them had been kinder, calmer, more generous. But the kindness and the genius came from the same root, and so did the cruelty. They drove each other to heights neither could have reached alone, precisely because each refused to let the other win. Remove the rivalry, and you remove the engine. There is no gentle version of this partnership that also produces this music. The destruction was not the failure of the collaboration. The destruction was the collaboration, seen at last without the disguise. So when you mourn the end of the Beatles, ask yourself what exactly you are mourning. Two friends who fell apart? Or two rivals who finally admitted what they had always been? Who had spent 10 years building cathedrals out of the need to defeat each other? And who stopped only when there was nothing left to win? If the wound and the masterpiece grew from the same soil, would you really cut one out to save the other? Where art does not console, by neat autopsies.